But on the other hand, because I don't think that humans are special just in virtue of being a member of the species Homo sapien, I think that if you have humans who are, for example, severely damaged at birth, that it's not wrong to end their lives. So I think that in some cases, human beings don't have a right to life because they don't have the possibility of having a worthwhile and meaningful life. And so, of course,
you used the word animals, but I suppose what you should have said is non-human animals.
Absolutely, yes. Often when I write, I use that term, although of course it gets a bit long-winded. But precisely the point is that we recognize that we are animals. And of course, once we recognize that, then we have to ask the question, well, what's so different about us? Except the sort of the Darwinian picture that we're not somehow a specially created species that's been, got a God-given right to rule over the other animals.
An absolutist moralist would say, well, humans are just plain special, and cows are not human, so they don't deserve the same moral consideration. But a scientist might come along and say, well, what do you mean by that? I mean, we are, after all evolved. We're all cousins. At what point in the evolution of, since we know evolution is a fact, at what point in the evolution of humans would you suddenly draw the line and say, right, from now on they're all human, and before that they're not?
The views of Peter Singer and Richard Dawkins are indicative of the consensus view that human beings are the result of evolution, being merely animals with no right to life and are not to be considered as being special or autonomous in all the earth. In part 2 of our series entitled Abortion v. Natural Rights, we will look at the historical, biological, and philosophical progression leading up to today's placid compliance and immoral reasoning for the act of taking the life from a child awaiting its birth within their inculcated mother's womb. We must ask, what has led to our society to having so little regard for the life of another human being, a child, a baby awaiting birth? We begin by identifying the all-encompassing influence of Charles Darwin's idea of biological evolution in the mid and latter portions of the 19th century that has had on all the categorical sciences. Darwin's ideas have been readily accepted as fact, and with their acceptance has come the questioning of the truth and veracity of the inviolability, distinctiveness, and sacredness of human life. This questioning branches into multiple proportions, such as the authenticity of God's act of creation, the reason for the universe, the purpose of life, the course of history, the blessedness of human life, and whether or not human beings are indeed created in God's very own likeness and image. Darwinism assumes that all matter events in time and place are inadvertent, accidental, random, by chance, coincidental, and mere luck. If human beings are not created in God's own image, nor have any intrinsic worth, then it becomes much easier to justify murder and much easier to accept and rationalize the slaying of vulnerable life, because no moral, objective truth exists, and neither does any retribution or justice exist for those who consent on taking the life of another human being. In 1798, Thomas Malthus wrote his essay on the principles of population, in which he theorized that a food shortage was imminent, and his belief that human population would soon outgrow the world's food supply. He wrote, quote, "All children beyond what would be required to keep up the population to this level must necessarily perish, unless room be made for them by the deaths of grown persons," unquote. Influenced greatly by the theories of Thomas Malthus and Charles Darwin, Herbert Spencer became convinced that ethics and morals had evolved along with man's physical characteristics, and that they were driven by a competition for resources. Spencer, who coined the phrase, quote, "survival of the fittest," unquote, in 1864, believed that society could achieve a balance of peace, freedom, and harmony, but that this perfection could only be achieved through a, quote, "weeding out," unquote, process that would target either naturally or artificially individuals that were deemed a hindrance to society's utopian goal. He was greatly concerned by mankind's willingness to support and protect those that he felt would be otherwise eliminated by natural selection. Malthus' population theory and Spencer's social Darwinism have helped provide a philosophical foundation for the abortion movement. However, famed German evolutionist Ernst Haeckel did more to devalue the life of the unborn child. Haeckel theorized that each animal retraces its evolutionary history during its embryonic development. This theory is known as biogenic law. To provide proof for his theory, Haeckel created a series of drawings that showed the embryonic development of several animals, including a fish, salamander, turtle, chicken, rabbit, and a human. Although Ernst Haeckel's biogenic law has long since proven to be a complete fraud, Haeckel's biogenic law remains entrenched in modern evolutionary teachings. Walter Bach, a biologist from Columbia University, says that, quote, "The biogenic law has become so deeply rooted in biological thought that it cannot be weeded out in spite of its having been demonstrated to be wrong by numerous subsequent scholars," unquote. The need to indoctrinate society into believing that the unborn child is less than human and simply a fish or an amphibian, a reptile or a mammal, depending upon the stage it is in its embryological development, has been necessary to justify the taking of what is considered insignificant human life. If the life of the unborn can be devalued, then it can be eliminated beyond the need of any moral justification. Haeckel even went so far as to extend this thinking to infanticide. He wrote, quote, "The destruction of abnormal newborn infants cannot rationally be classified as murder. Redemption from this evil should be accomplished by a dose of some painless and rapid poison under the control of an authoritative commission," unquote. Following the path of evolutionary dogma, Peter Singer, a professor of bioethics with a background in philosophy at Princeton, published the following statement. Quote, "We can no longer base our ethics on the idea that human beings are a special form of creation," unquote. If human beings, therefore, are not special in all of the creation, then they can be slaughtered like any other common animal for commercial consumption. Famed atheist and evolutionist Richard Dawkins wrote the following in his book, quote, "The God Delusion," unquote. Quote, "Notice now that pro-life doesn't exactly mean pro-life at all. It means pro-human life. The granting of uniquely special rights to cells of the species Homo sapiens is hard to reconcile with the fact of evolution. The humanness of an embryo cells cannot confer upon it any absolutely discontinuous moral status," unquote. Self-proclaimed Darwinian James Rachel stated the following with regards to the true moral implications of evolution. Quote, "Human life will no longer be regarded with the kind of superstitious awe which it has accorded in traditional thought, and the lives of non-humans will no longer be a matter of indifference. This means that human life will, in a sense, be devalued, while the value granted to non-human life will be increased," unquote. This thought has been precisely applied today with administrative agencies making laws and regulations protecting non-human species. Yet no regard exists nor laws produced to protect those awaiting birth, those human beings developing in their mother's womb. Contrary to the remarks made by Pete Singer and Richard Dawkins at the beginning of this presentation, a clear distinction indeed exists between human life from any other creature in this world. The sanctity of created human life being elevated by the divine creator of the universe, as we read, quote, "And God said, let the earth bring forth the living creature after his kind, cattle and creeping thing, and beast of the earth after his kind. And it was so. And God made the beast of the earth after his kind, and cattle after their kind, and everything that creepeth upon the earth after his kind. And God saw that it was good." And God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. Genesis 1:24 through 27. Our nation's founding document, the Declaration of Independence, indeed recognizes the God-given, unalienable right to life of each human being created equal in their humanity, rather than having evolved as an animal with no right of life, nor having dominion over all the earth. The battle to prove the humanity of the child being formed by God within its mother's womb is not just a battle concerning pro-life or pro-choice. Initially, it is the battle between creation and evolution, for it is at this fundamental level that the questions of life and death are answered. We must not allow the evolution movement to go unimpeded. We must fight this fatal philosophy on all fronts, in the state and federal legislatures, in the courts, in the classrooms, in popular culture, and in our prayer closets. In part 2 of our series, Abortion v. Natural Rights 2, we will examine the role eugenics and Planned Parenthood has played in the abortion movement. My name is J.R. Carman of the New Jersey Constitutional Republicans.